We do this by conducting workshops, delivering valuable training and correspondence, as well as providing scholarships to deserving youth. We accept contributions for scholarships, workshops, and the online educational training platform we'll construct shortly. It is within this tradition that we have been sponsoring these town hall meetings, which are broadcast live on Zoom, Facebook, live stream, and YouTube. They are designed to assist parents and students gain strength, strategies, and knowledge to cope in this unplanned for but new environment. Let us begin with prayer, today offered by Mr. Nkosi Plummer, an alumnus and scholarship recipient of Collaborate to Educate Our Sons.
Let's pray. Lord Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day, Lord, another opportunity of life, Lord God, and we thank you for just the privilege to share information in regards to what's going on in this world today, Lord God, just to share insight, wisdom, and we ask, Lord, that your Holy Spirit would be with all of us, be with the panelists, um, and I pray, Lord, that you would bless their words and guide them as they share their wisdom and understanding about the topic at hand. We thank you, Lord God, for your presence. We thank you for your love, your grace, and your everlasting mercy. And in the midst of everything going on, we ask for your grace and we ask just for more of your spirit. We love you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. A few instructions for our audience. Everyone on Zoom is muted. Please do not unmute yourself without permission. Your movement, chatter, and activity will affect the quality of the broadcast. If you have a question or a comment, please use the chat. If you have a question for our presenter, please write it in the chat and we will try to have it answered. The topic for today is parenting through chaos. Today I'm privileged to be your moderator. As you know, I'm an ordained minister, a professor at Howard University School of Divinity, and the founder of Collaborate to Educate Our Sons. But first, let me introduce the panel. Dr. Fred Lee is a 31-year veteran of the police force with experience going from the beat to the office. He's currently an administrative desk supervisor for the Technical Division branch of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, which eminently qualifies him to speak on today's topic. Dr. Lee is a father and an ordained minister who holds theological degrees from Howard University School of Divinity. He's also a board member of CEOS, and I'm proud to say one of my students. Mr. Tawana Mosley has 23 years of experience in local and federal law enforcement, having worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons and as a police officer for the Pentagon Police Department. He's now assigned to the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, Counterintelligence Branch, serving as a law enforcement expert to the department. He has worked alongside as well as gained the respect and rapport with some of the most eminent figures in the Department of Defense, which also gives him great qualification to be on our panel today. The third panelist is Pastor Steve Murphy. He's an experienced pastor who is currently senior pastor of the Wheaton Seventh-day Adventist Church. He has served as youth pastor who cared for the youth of the church. Additionally, he is a trained counselor who advises and counsels youth, adults, mothers and fathers, I'd say the family. As a father himself, He has firsthand experience of the challenges these times provide for our youth and the questions they ask. He is not only trained to answer them, he is experienced at it. Um, our topic, then, as we said, is parenting through crisis. And what I've asked the panelists to do is to go at it from their fields of perspective. The law enforcement agents will look at the topic as fathers and law enforcement officers. And Pastor Murphy will go at it from his perspective as a pastor, a counselor, and a parent. We'd like to begin by asking each panelist to make a short statement about what their view of the topic is. I'd like to begin with Dr. Lee.
Well, good evening to all, and I am so humbled to be here to share with you my experience, and as well as to hopefully give you some insight on law enforcement and what we do and why we do what we do as law enforcement officers. But I would say that foremost, I'm a peace officer. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I'm a peace officer. And I've been that way for the last 30 years. I've also been beautifully blessed to be married to my wife for 28 years, Therese. And we've had 6 children and 6 grandchildren. So as far as being a father and being a husband, I've been also a police officer for that many years of our children's age. So we've grown up all together in that big family. So I think I carry some experience as a father, even though my kids would laugh at me and think that I still have a lot to learn. But I come to you today, and the question was asked about the comport and how a person needs to behave. And sadly, today we have to teach our youth how to behave in front of law enforcement officers only for their safety, that they may go home, as opposed to being shot at or even choked. And that really bothers me that we're here now talking about this subject matter, because being a police officer as long as I've been in there, it's just been very hard for me to understand why officers have to treat people the way they treat people. And being in the experience that I've been in for the last 31 years, I've come across a lot of great people that weren't police that taught me how to be a better police officer. So hopefully in tonight's session, my experience will come out and I will be able to help somebody understand what it is to walk in that walk. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mosley?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for your opportunity to be on this panel here. Again, I have 20 plus years of law enforcement, and as Dr. Lee stated, it is a sad thing that we have to have topics such as this in this environment. However, I will say that the majority of your law enforcement officers are good individuals. I know it's a cliche, and I know it's, for some folks, it is hard to believe. However, it's the bad ones that get all the publicity. The good ones are the ones that are, they don't get the publicity. So I must say that. Also, what I want to say to our young folks is, if you don't listen to anything else that is on this panel tonight, the one thing that I want you to take with you is educate yourself on the laws. That is a must, on educating yourself on the laws, knowing your laws. And I'll say this: respect goes a long way, um, and it goes both on both sides, law enforcement and civilians. Respect goes a long way. Um, as a police officer, law enforcement officer, we work for the public. So and I think that's a lost art that a lot of people got away from, is the fact that as a law enforcement officer, I work for you. It's my job to protect and serve the community that we work in. Um, it's it's condescending that it's hard to believe, again, and it hurts me because, as a black male being on both sides of the fence, it's, I can relate to both sides. But it's one of those things that it's a topic that we need to discuss. Again, respect goes a long way, on both sides. But again, I can't reiterate it enough. Please, everyone, know your laws. That way, when you engage with a law enforcement official, you know what you're doing. You know your rights. Don't allow someone to tell you something that is against. So I'll finish up there.
Okay, thank you, sir. Pastor Steve. Have we lost Pastor Murphy?
I believe he didn't unmute himself.
I got it. Thank you.
Go
Yeah.
right ahead.
So, Dr. Melbourne, when you first contacted me about parenting in a crisis, I think we were talking about COVID-19, right? But since then, we've got a crisis within a crisis. As a pastor, as a parent, I'm in the middle of it. My son just literally 10 minutes ago left the house. He was going to practice, do his exercise for basketball. He's a college ball player. He's 6'3", athletic. He looks like a kid the police may be interested in. And so every time he goes out, it's something that's playing on my mind as he drives to go wherever he's going. I'm thinking about, will he come home safely? I have an 11-year-old in the house. Last week he said, "Dad, we're going to the marches, right? We're going to protest." He said, "If you're not going to go, I'm going to get on my bike, put my backpack on, and go down there myself." So I'm in the middle of a situation where my boys are really on the front line. And so as a parent, I have to think very carefully and very intentionally about how I deal with this situation. As a therapist, I deal with young people all the time who've had police encounters. I had a client, he was 9 years old, he was at school, his teacher thought he was attempting suicide. The school called the police came and cuffed him and took him to a mental health facility for adults. So when he came to see me, he was being treated for PTSD for his encounter with the police. And I agree with my brothers who are police officers that it's the minority, but that 1%, 2% can have a drastic impact on many of our kids and our families. So I'm passionate about helping our young people to weather the trauma, but also prepare themselves mentally to deal with what may come, and also parents, arming parents with good skills, good understanding, good parenting skills to be able to deal with these situations when they arise. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Now I think this is a good follow-up to our discussion of last week. Events of the last several years generally, and the last few weeks particularly, highlight the dilemma of black and brown males in America. I've often wondered, and have spoken out loudly and publicly, that young men are endangered species in 21st century America. Let me repeat that. I've often wondered out and spoken loudly and publicly about the fact that young black and brown men are endangered species in 21st century America. They can lose their lives for not dimming their lights. I don't know how many of you saw that video last night. Or for a $20 bill, fake or not. Some people are now saying that that $20 bill was actually good and not fake. Or they could lose their lives by vigilantes, or just for doing nothing. There seems to be a culture among some officers that black lives mean nothing. What are your thoughts on this and on policing today? Let me begin with Dr. Fred. What are your thoughts, given what I've just said, what are your thoughts on policing today and being young and black?
Well, from my perspective, I look at it this way. It's we get so caught up in cliches about being what bad apple. There's only a few bad apples. But if that's the case, then we have to look at the tree. And then if we look at the tree, then we have to look at the orchard in which the tree is in. And that being said, this is systemic racism that has infested every walk of life in America and throughout the world. So if we're getting bad apples, then that tree is producing bad apples. And as Christ has told us, if the fig tree is not producing good fruit, you cut the tree down and dig out the roots and kill it all. So I know that this may sound harsh, but the fact of the matter is that the system is not doing what it's supposed to do. And that is to create a safe environment for everybody. So as a parent of two young men, where both my sons have been pulled over by police, including myself as a police officer, I know the stress that goes up in your blood system when those lights go on behind you. My oldest son got a gun pulled on him by a police officer. So I had the fear of, was he going to make it home that night? When he told me what happened, it shocked me. I was enraged, I was upset, I was mad. But then what could I do other than go and see about it? And there really was nothing I could do about it other than he was safe, and that officer, I couldn't find her. And I would have said a couple words to her as well. Our young men are in danger. So as a parent, I'm just as worried about my children, even my daughters, going out here and dealing with the police element today. Because let's face it, right now, police are very, very nervous. They're nervous about their jobs. They're frustrated about their lives. So you have to be careful, because they're decision makers that are deciding on people's lives, that they not only can hurt them with their gun or with their hands, they can hurt them with their pens. A lot of people go to jail because of what a police officer wrote, just as much as what a police officer has done in handcuffing them and choking them or shooting them.
Okay, Mr. Mosby, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I would say as law enforcement officer, we failed you. Our job is, again, to protect and serve, but we failed you. There was recently a friend of mine that posted on her social media account that she was talking to her son, and her son stated that he was white. So she asked him, she says, well, why would you say that? And he stated to her that, I want to live, I don't want to get shot. So for young kids to think that way, as a law enforcement official, we failed you. When I've talked to numerous people, and the consensus now is that kids don't trust law enforcement. So now kids are growing up not trusting law enforcement officials. And by all means, they have every right to do so. And with the nature of what's going on now, that's how it's going to be. And as a law enforcement official, we need to do better. We need to interject. We need to gain a rapport with the community again. You know, when I was growing up, I grew up. I call it it's a small town right outside of Philadelphia, but I call it a big city in a small town.
Mm.
So that being said, when I was growing up as a kid, you had community policing. So you knew what cops patrolled your area. So that being said, it was mom knew who this cop was, grandma knew who this cop was. If little Bobby was getting out of line, they can call, Officer Wilson, and Officer Wilson come over and he sits down and talks to little Bobby versus immediately going to his hip and grabbing one of his tools from his hip. So he gained that rapport with those individuals, and they knew those individuals. And that's the biggest thing that policing got away from, is community policing. Now I understand there's certain towns and there's certain environments that you can't do the community policing because it's rural. But for the majority of where Black men live, it's a lost art. I mean, cops don't talk to individuals no more. It's more or less. But not only that, the other thing is you have a lot of cops that don't understand us. The problem is, and I'll use this, scenario. You get a white cop from the sticks of West Virginia, and you might have 5 Black people in the town. So that particular town doesn't pay well. So he decides to go to Washington, D.C., where the money is good. So now you go to Washington, D.C., and the majority of Washington, D.C. is Black. So now you're dealing with a bunch of races and ethnicities that you're not familiar with. And the thing is you have to be willing to learn and listen. Every successful person is an expert listener. And in policing, you have to be an expert listener. Because again, you may miss something if I come onto a scene and that's the other problem, is if I come onto a scene and I get a call from dispatch, and I automatically, when I get there, it's a Black male wearing a black sweatshirt with a hoodie and blue jeans, and this is the call that came in. So what's happening in today's society is when I arrive on that scene, I'm automatically thinking that this individual is guilty, not knowing what the circumstances are. Mm-hmm. And as we've seen, it's easy for someone to pick up the phone and say, hey, this guy is threatening my life. This guy did this to me, without knowing all the facts. Mm-hmm. And I'll close with this: is policing is about facts. It's not necessarily about opinion. When I arrive on that scene, I can't automatically assume that, Joe Smith is guilty. I have to get all the facts. And then in that turn, then I put my expertise in there in deciding what actually took place. But that's the problem now, is when people automatically assume that you're guilty.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a good comment, and it gives me a lead into what I'm going to say next. And I'm going to expand the question a little to include Pastor Murphy. But coming to America in my early 30s and moving to this area, my mid 30s, one of my great fears was being stopped by a police officer having a sketch that resembled me, and I was not the person, and wondering what I would do. Lo and behold, one afternoon, I walked out of my front door, went into my car with my 4-year-old. And the cop was across the street at the 7-Eleven, and he came behind me, put on his light, stopped me, asked for my license. I gave it to him. And I overheard him on the speaker loudly. My 4-year-old heard it and asked, Dad, what's that? I heard him telling Central Control that he had the suspect. And after a while, he came back, gave me my license, and said I could go. So I said, how do you mean I could go when you just said, and I guess I was bold to have done this, I heard you tell Central Control that you had the suspect. And he said, well, the suspect had on everything that you have on, except that the suspect had a cap on and you don't have a cap on. Well, I proceeded to say, well, I know you folks want to know who I am since I moved into this house. Here's my business card, and I gave him my business card. But here's the expansion for you, Pastor Murphy. How do you deal with a cop saying stuff like that, doing stuff like that in the presence of a 4-year-old? How does that affect the mind and development of a young child?
Yeah, in my work as a therapist, a big deal in my sessions is talking about racism. Most of my clients are Black men, and I give them an opportunity which they normally wouldn't have, at work or even in church sometimes. I give them opportunities to talk about their experiences. I've had my experiences where I was stopped in Tacoma Park, they checked my stuff, and the guy came back and said, "Oh, I see you're not wanted by any agency." And I was like, why would I be wanted by any agency? But his assumption was, this guy looks a certain way, driving a particular car, he's going to potentially have these warrants or whatever it is. And so for many Black men, many Black people really, it's traumatic to live in this society. And so I give opportunity to say, what's been your experience of racism? How do you handle it? How do you deal with it? And so, I also give them tools and techniques to cope with, coping skills, how to deal with their stress and their worries about being stopped or having been stopped or going through a traumatic experience. I was in Chipotle some years ago, 2014, with my son. We were just waiting in line, and my son was in front of me, and behind me came I think he was a Maryland State Trooper, big guy, white guy. He didn't say anything to me. He didn't look at me in any particular way, but I felt this anger and rage just well up inside of me. And I was shocked because I'm laid back, I'm chill, but I've been watching all this stuff to do with Trayvon Martin. So I'd bottled up all this anger and rage. Now, nothing happened, but I realized, wow, if you're 10, 12, 20, 25, and you see this stuff, you encounter this stuff, you're going to want to lash out. You're going to want to respond perhaps in a negative kind of way. And so I think, our churches need to be forums for places where people can talk about these issues. I think in many ways, the Black church has abandoned certain communities to deal with this stuff by themselves. Once you're a professional, you live in a certain neighborhood, you particularly probably don't want to encounter folks from a different neighborhood, even though you're Black brothers and sisters. So I think churches and community systems can do a better job as to giving forums for people to talk about what they've been through and allow officers to explain the processes and the procedures and the young people to articulate their hurt and anger. And so, I believe in talk therapy. Talk works. Just literally sitting down for an hour and talking through these issues does a world of good, because we're going through repeated traumas year after year, month after month. You think it's done, you think it's dealt with, and then another situation comes up, and it just piles trauma upon trauma. And so I think we need to create spaces like these to allow people to air their grievances, to talk about their experiences.
Thank you. Gentlemen, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I would like to speak to that. As a beat officer in the city of Pittsburgh, one of my greatest assets was walking the beat and learning the people. And you solve a lot of crimes when the people know that you are there for them, as opposed that you're there to harass them. Mm-hmm. If you're walking a beat and you don't speak to anybody, and you got your leather gloves on and your sunglasses on and your shirt rolled up and you're looking all tough, you're going to find it very hard to get along in that community. If you're only driving around in your car and your windows never roll down and you never speak to anybody, it's going to be hard to work in that community. As my fellow colleague, Officer Mosley, said, we have to become more community oriented again. As officers, it's our sworn duty to protect and serve the community, not to serve us. as well as I believe that officers need to be moving back into those communities that they serve, because it has a two-sided hold on it. One, it holds you accountable when you live in the community in which you serve in. Two, it holds the people accountable to you that you're serving. So you can't get away with a lot of stuff if folks know that there's a police officer in the neighborhood, and that officer can't get away with acting like a jerk when he's in the neighborhood.
Mhm.
And it's just a way of opening up. And as Pastor said, we have to create that space for people to feel comfortable to speak. I have to create that space that my children will be able to speak to me and tell me what's going on with them. And a lot of times when you're working shifts and you're working nights and days, it's hard for your kids to relate to you as a police officer because they're going one way when you're going the other way. So, but we have to learn how to create that space again. We have to become back to being communal policing, communal families, communal. We're so spread out now. Technology has made us more or less. It's crazy how technology has made us less more communicating with each other than it's supposed to bring us to closer together.
Thank you, sir. Now, as an officer and a parent, what advice would you give your son or young person on how to react when stopped or accosted by an officer? I've heard you speak a little to that, Dr. Lee. So again, let me begin with you.
Wow. Um, and this is a question that really bothers me because every police officer does things differently. I mean, how you get stopped in PG County will differ how you get stopped in Montgomery County. How you get stopped in Montgomery County will differ how you get stopped in DC. Officers need to earn the respect before they expect respect.
Mhm.
And as a police officer, one, I have to diffuse the situation, not incite the situation. And I preload that to say that if I'm teaching my son or daughter how to react when a police officer stops you, you have to become more attentive on what that officer is doing, what he's saying, what he's wearing, who he works for. And you can't be afraid to ask questions. It's okay to ask the question. It's okay to ask
It's 6 o'clock.
what police department do you work for? What's your badge number? And if they give you a smart answer, mentally remember those things because it's going to come back to help you when you want to file a complaint. And you can't be afraid to complain, to your parents as well as to the police department.
Mhm.
Now I don't want to say don't look them in the eye, don't get tough with them, because again, if you're being done wrong, you're going to get upset. But remember, your anger is just going to escalate the situation even more. But you got to remember and listen to whatever they're saying to you, and listen who's there, and look around who's there, and be able to articulate that to your family, be able to talk to your parents about it, and don't hold back. Don't be quiet about what happened. Don't be ashamed of what happened. Be able to come to your parents and talk to them. And if your parents are not available, go to an adult that you trust and speak to them about what happened with you with a police officer, principal, um, a neighbor, somebody that you know you can trust and tell your story to. Because until we weed out these bad apples are going to continually do the things that they do. But if we hold them accountable, then they'll stop doing those things.
Mhm.
And then that also falls into training, but that's another question.
Okay, good. Officer Mosley, would you add anything? And is there anything you would say to a young person? Definitely don't do if stopped by a cop.
Well, I'll first say that policing is personality driven. So you take an individual's personality and now you're giving him a gun and badge. So it's just like any other business. You know, you have you have good people and you got bad people. But now when you take an individual that has a bad personality, you have you take an individual that has his own personal agenda, whatever it may be, becoming a police officer. Now that individual has this power. But I'll go back to what I said earlier, that the majority of your police officers are good individuals. That being said, one of the things that, you know, I have an extremely large family. One of the things I tell my kids and some of my family members is, again, first, respect goes a long way. You know, it's like I said earlier, and that's on both sides. But if you don't feel safe, you know, if you're getting pulled over and just say you're on a back road or it's late at night and you don't feel safe, there's nothing wrong with you driving to a safer location. You know, call 911 as you're driving and say, hey, I got an officer behind me. I'm just pulling over to a safer location. Pull into a strip mall, a gas station where there's other people around, where you have other witnesses. And again, it goes back to me saying that we shouldn't, you know, it saddens me that we're having this conversation. And it saddens me that I have to tell my kids, I have to tell my cousins, my nephews, my nieces to do such a thing, but that's the society that we live in. But it goes back to to piggyback on what Dr. Lee said, is remember what's taking place. You know, if there's certain situations that's taking place that you're not comfortable with, remember that, but keep your composure. And one of the things I tell my kids is, don't make a decision when emotions are involved. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we get pulled over and we get upset because, especially if we know that we didn't do anything wrong. So now we're getting upset and now we're getting aggressive. That's not going to get you anywhere. You know, remember the details of what's taking place. And if you need to make a complaint, make that complaint. But don't put yourself in a situation, especially if you feel that this cop is in the wrong. Don't put yourself in a deeper situation. And again, it's not to say that you've done anything wrong. And that's the problem, is because these bad apples that, you know, try to agitate you to do something so they can react. Mm-hmm. That goes back to me saying earlier that policing is personality driven. You have individuals that shouldn't have a gun in a badge. They should have never got sworn in as a police officer just based off of their character. Unfortunately, in today's society, policing is becoming, a lot of people are retiring. They're just quitting the job because they just don't want any parts of it. But I also tell the young people is, encourage other people. If you feel like you're in a community and you have a lot of bad cops or a lot of bad politicians, encourage other people to take those jobs. You know, encourage, you know, or you yourself. And again, I know everyone doesn't want to be a police officer. Everyone doesn't want to be a politician. I totally get that. But we need to take back our communities. You know, and that's where we start. Is I live in this community. This is where my family lives. We need to start taking this community back. So it goes back to what Dr. Lee said again earlier, is, you know, in the city of Philadelphia, for a perfect example, if you're a police officer in the city of Philadelphia, if you're a firefighter and you're a teacher in the city of Philadelphia, you must live in Philadelphia. And that is huge, because the thing is, if I'm policing in this city, I'm going to do things completely different. I'm going to treat you completely different because you live in my community. I can't treat you bad and then I go 2, 3, 4 counties over where I don't have to deal with you.
Mhm.
Or I'm going to care more because of the fact that I live in this community. So these crime-ridden areas, I'm going to care more in those areas because I live there. But again, and I can't say this enough, educate yourself. Educate yourself on the laws. That is huge because you have to know your rights. And you have to know when a police officer is telling you to do something that you shouldn't be doing. But I also say is social media is bad in some cases, because if you see a video of someone doing something in Texas and you say, oh, okay, well, I can do this over here in Maryland or Pennsylvania or DC. Every state has they have their own laws. So you need to know your laws for that state. Okay, what am I getting pulled over for? Is the officer supposed to tell me initially what am I getting pulled over for? Do I have to show him my identification? Do I have to get out of my vehicle? So you need to know these different things. And that's why I say, make sure you educate yourself.
Thank you. All right, Pastor Murphy.
Can I ask a question to the officers? Would you recommend recording an encounter?
Again, it goes back to there's certain cities and certain states that it's their law that the law is that you cannot record law enforcement in the course of peace. And it goes back to me saying, know your laws. Now, there's not a whole lot of states and cities that, have that law, but there are states and laws that do it. But I highly recommend it. I'm the type of person where the camera is my friend. Again, if I pull you over or if I have an interaction with you, the camera is my friend. And there's nothing wrong with, when you get pulled over, saying, sir, ma'am, due to the climate of what's taking place, for your safety and mine, I'm going to turn my camera on. My camera's facing me. It's not necessarily facing you, whatever you feel comfortable with doing. And again, being respectful and doing it and letting that individual know, hey, this is for my safety as well as yours. I just want to record this encounter. There's nothing wrong with that.
Good.
And I agree with that as well, is that you really diffuse the situation when you let them know, hey, look, I don't feel comfortable with this situation, so I'm gonna turn my phone on and record what's going on here. And the officer is instantly gonna either escalate the situation or he's gonna back down from the situation. But the thing is that you need to protect yourself. And that's the craziest thing now, is that we have to protect ourselves from police. And where did we come to as a society? That you have to protect yourself from the police officer.
Yeah.
And I feel really bad that we have to do that, but hey, you have to do what you got to do to make it home.
That's right. Okay, Pastor Murphy, what would you say about the recent killings of blacks against the biblical principle of reverence for life?
One of the toughest things for me on this as a pastor is that I have white colleagues who are pastors who don't get it, who don't, they don't see anything to do with systematic racism. They don't think there's a problem. They say, if you guys would just cooperate with the officer, these things wouldn't happen. And so I realized that, we're not on common ground with a lot of people, even if we're the same faith, reading the same Bible. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that we really need to fight for our own respect and humanity. It's really at a stage now where we've got to claim our own position, our own place in the world. Those that we thought were allies at one time really aren't our allies. And so, the biblical principle of respect for life is very strong, but there's just some folks who call themselves Christians or call themselves Seventh-day Adventists, the same denomination as me, who don't see it in the same way. And so we have to harness the energies, the connections we have within our own communities and fight for those rights for ourselves. Now, the good thing is, when we went to the protests on Sunday, I was surprised at how many white young people that were there.
Mm-hmm.
So I realize now things have shifted. In past protests, past situations I've been to, it's been mainly 60, 70% black. But now in some instances, the majority of the demonstrators are white. And I think that more and more people, the younger generation, are beginning to understand what's really going on. So that's really encouraging. I think we can't be afraid to form alliances, to form connections with people outside of our own people group, outside of my church, or outside of, and you can tell from my accent, I'm not from here. I was born in England. My parents are Jamaican. And so, Jamaicans cluster together, Africans cluster together, African Americans cluster together. But I really think it's important that we, get allies from whatever walk of life to make a difference here. I don't think anybody's going to come to us and say, we're going to start to now respect you. We have to particularly get involved in our communities in terms of going to meetings, county meetings, and speaking up and making sure laws are changed to support what we believe.
That's right. I think the young people, you're correct. The young people are smart. Where I know a young man who, when he was in school, he was black, the teacher was white, and the teacher was discriminating against him. His peers saw it. So, and they wrote the same essay, turned it into the teacher. And the teacher gave the white ones A and gave the black one a different grade. And they called the teacher to task. We have to learn to work together. Now, Officers Lee and Mosley, is reverence for life a part of police training? If not, should it be? If it isn't, why aren't we seeing it practiced? And let me ask against this background, could it be, if my notion is correct, that the fact that the target practice for officers is usually something black, does that have anything to do with it?
Well, to some extent, I would say our training has always been our downfall. Because the training that we're receiving is not conducive to serving the public as more as is preserving our safety. So we have to learn how to incorporate serving the public more and helping out those more than just getting the bad guy. Now, there's some silhouettes in target practice that are white, and there's some silhouettes that are target practice are black. So I can't really say that your training has anything to do with the color. But what it does, what the training scars is that when the target turns around, you shoot at it until the threat stops. Or when you're shooting at the target, you aim at center mass. Now, I've been asked this question all the time: what's center mass? Any part of the body that you shoot at, the center mass is the target. So if your arm is the only thing that is you're showing me with a gun, I'm shooting at the center mass of that arm. So that being said, it's not about killing a person, it's stopping the person from doing what they're doing. A lot of officers train with training scars in the respect that the training is not applicable to their lifestyle. They're not transferring that over to what happens if I get stopped, if somebody comes upon me and I'm caught off guard. How do I handle the situation? We have some training that helps people with that, but a situation can go bad really quick. So a lot of officers are afraid, and I'll say this, and I don't care if I'm challenged by it. A lot of officers today are afraid to deal with situations, so they come with their gun ready to shoot, or they come with the taser ready to fire, because they're afraid that they're working in their fear as opposed to working in their training. Mm-hmm. So the reverence for life should always be, if I shoot somebody, I should immediately want to administer care to them, first making sure that they're secure. Now, you may see officers handcuff a person that's been shot. That's standard procedure. But you're supposed to render aid to that person. And I'll say this: when a person is handcuffed, they now become your responsibility. They become under your care, so that anything happens to that person under handcuffs, that falls on you as a police officer. And reverence for life is mainly what we always try to do, because we're trying to preserve life, not take life away. But as we've seen in a lot of these video clips, a lot of these sound bites, where police officers are always doing something wrong and hurting people, it looks bad. It looks like that we don't care for life. And I'll say this, when Officer Mosley back me up on it. Majority of the police officers want to see everybody go home. Sadly, it's those that don't care about life that get the spotlight and give us a bad name. I've been doing this for 31 years, and I've only pulled my gun out twice. And pulling my gun out twice to stop somebody from doing something has been something that's haunted me for several years, because I pulled my gun on a 6-year-old child when doing a building raid. And I pulled the gun on a young man who was shooting his gun off in the air at a party. Now, I could have killed them both and been justified in doing so. But then I would have to look at myself in the mirror every day. And I chose not to do it. And that's the one thing that we have more than anything else in the military. We have discretion. We need to use our discretion better to preserve life.
Okay. Anything to add, Officer Mosley?
I'll add again. I'll state the fact of policing is personality driven. Dr. Lee may handle a situation completely different than I may handle a situation, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. And I've been saying this time after time, is you have a lot of officers that shouldn't be officers, and they're fearful of certain individuals. Again, if you come into a situation and you're fearful the majority of the time, then perhaps you should look into another career field. Because if you're fearful and you're going into that situation, there's a great chance you're going to go to one of your tools on your tool belt. And in most cases, it's not necessary. I've just seen a video that's going viral. Maybe some of you may have seen it recently. It was a black man. He got pulled over, and the officer had his gun drawn. If you feel like you have to have your gun drawn during the majority of your traffic stops, that's an issue. Now, don't get me wrong. You have what we call high-risk traffic stops. You have what we call felony traffic stops. With those situations, 9 times out of 10, all the officers that respond to those situations are going to have their guns drawn, because it's a high-risk traffic stop. Now, there's something that took place that now deems that a high-risk traffic stop. And you're also going to call that in. Hey, this is a felony traffic stop. This is a high-risk traffic stop. There's going to be other officers that are responding. But again, the problem is with training now, with policing, is it leaves a lot of officer discretion. And when you have the bad apples, they feel that this is their discretion. Hey, I'm going to do all my traffic stops with my gun out. And that just diminishes the trust of the community. Again, why do you feel like you need to have your gun drawn during this traffic stop? There's 2 kids in the back. There's 2 kids that just witnessed you with your gun drawn during this traffic stop. They didn't see mommy or daddy do anything wrong, but all of a sudden there's a police officer with his gun drawn and he's screaming at mommy or daddy. That's a problem. That's a major problem. I feel that training is a big factor. Training in policing is just like technology. It's you buy a computer, in 2 years that computer is almost like a dinosaur, because there's so much new technology that came out. So the thing is, with training in policing is you got to stay abreast of what's taking place in society. And again, everything is different. You know, policing in PG County is going to be completely different than policing in the sticks of Colorado. So, you know, that training is huge. Now, when we go, myself and Dr. Lee, we both went to the federal law enforcement training facility down in Georgia. That's where the majority of your federal law enforcement personnel go to. Now, when you go there, you get the basics. You learn your laws. You learn your laws of what you can do and what you can't do. You learn your physical techniques on, you know, how to take an individual down, how to cuff an individual, you know, from, you know, tactical shooting and so forth and so on. Then we come back and we go to an additional set of training based off of our department. So every department is different, and I think we do need to have across the board type training. Now, case in point, after 9/11 was a disaster communication-wise with law enforcement and the fire department, because everyone had their own set of rules and how they talk. So after 9/11, the federal government came up with this thing. It's called plain language. So now what they do with training law enforcement and fire departments across the board, they speak one language. They don't have codes. They speak one language. And that's the same thing that we need to start doing with policing is we need to, in a sense, police with the same language. And again, personalities are going to come into play. And, you know, I started my career working local corrections. I was always that guy that I was the voice of reasoning. I called myself. You know, I talked to the younger guys and tried to, you know, guide them in the right direction. You know, I tried to throw reality and different scenarios out them as to why they shouldn't get into that situation again. We can't fix what happened, but I tried to be that voice of reasoning. And my objective was, if I helped one of those individuals out of the hundreds that I talked to, I did a good job because I saved one of them. And it went a long way because, again, I lived in a small town and I had individuals come up to me and tell me, hey, man, you know, thank you for that talk. I really needed that. I didn't think, you know, things would be that way. A quick story, I get to work one day and there was a big disturbance at the jail. And the chief deputy warden was ticked off at what happened. They destroyed the place. So he locked the entire jail down. So he sends me over to talk to the guys on the maximum security block because he knew that I was that guy that was able to talk to individuals and try to gain a rapport. So I threw reality at him and I told them, hey, I understand. And it was a correctional officer that basically set them off. It was an individual that set them off, and that individual ended up losing his job. But he set them off because of his actions. So what I said to them, you know, I explained to them, hey, there's a different way you could have went about this. I says, now because of you went this way, the entire jail is locked down. All you guys that are supposed to call your wives, your kids, your moms today, now you can't do that because of your actions. And I get it, you were upset, and by all means, you had the right to be upset. However, it was the way you went about expressing your anger. So all the individuals that were supposed to get visits that day, they couldn't get visits because of their actions. So, you know, I say that on both sides as a police, and I'm glad I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, I also say that there's something positive that can come out of every situation, to include the most traumatic situation, such as George Floyd. That was extremely traumatic for him, and he's no longer here. But at the same time, there's so much positivity that is coming out of this situation. Like Pastor Murphy said earlier, like there's a lot of unity that's taking place now. You know, black, white, you name it. There's a lot of unity. But not only that, it's people are beginning to notice, okay, to include the NFL. Yeah, we kept hearing what you guys are saying, but now I think we're truly understanding. Before it kept falling on deaf ears, but now we see this and we understand what you're saying. So again, we have to continue to, as a community, we have to continue to have a voice. We have to continue to have these discussions. There's nothing wrong with, if you see a cop, talk to the cop, start a dialogue, and again, just ask him, how can we fix this? Get his or her point of view. Now, if you feel that this individual is someone that you can't talk to, then keep it moving. But we need to have that dialogue. And again, it goes back to, you have some people that they don't get it. And the reason they don't get it is because it's not happening to them. Mm-hmm. You get some people that are quick to say, oh, well, I was pulled over and, I obeyed the law. And there's a lot of black men that got pulled over and they obeyed the law and things still went left for them just because you had a bad apple. So it happens. And I'll use something that Will Smith said. He basically said in a sense that this is nothing new. It's just now we have an audience. Mm-hmm. It's people have cameras. People are quick to pull out the cameras, in which I'm all for. Pull out them cameras and record that situation. But yeah, it's again, we have to keep this dialogue going.
Thank you. We're out of time, but I have two burning questions that I'd like us to take half a minute to answer. The first one is, Pastor Murphy, things seem to be out of control. The distrust seems to be deep. Jesus said, love your enemies. As a black boy, how can I love those who kill us and do such wrongs to us?
Yes, that's a great question. My answer would be that love is not a feeling, it's an attitude. So, you can love somebody that you don't like, meaning that you can treat them respectfully, you can be kind to them, you can be respectful, but not like them. And so, love is patient, love is kind. That's what the Bible says, 1 Corinthians 13. It's a list of actions. It's things that you do. So you may have a police officer that you really dislike, you only encounter with him, but you can still be respectful of him or to him. And so, you can still love somebody and not like that person. So any young person who encounters the police, they need to make a decision whether they're going to be loving towards them in their actions as opposed to their feelings. That's my answer.
Thank you. So you're saying basically you can love the individual and not like the actions, right?
Sure. It's not easy. It's hard. Martin Luther King talks about strength to love. It requires strength to be loving to someone that you don't like, and you have to practice it, work hard at it. We're married. Sometimes we don't always get on with our spouses, but we choose to love them. We decide to continue to love them despite the situation. So you can make a decision to continue to act kindly and respectfully to the police without loving the police or liking the police.
Good. Last question for officers. If you had the opportunity to change anything in the law enforcement, what would be that one thing you would do?
Well, the one thing I think we need to do is to change the way people are hired and the background checks that are done, and just the whole structure of hiring a police officer needs to be revamped so that it's a reoccurring, there's reoccurring looking at the person as a whole. And Counselor Pastor Murphy can can help me out with this, is that there should be reoccurring counseling going on with officers, because everybody goes through stressful situations in their lives. And when you put a person with a gun on their hip and the power to change a person's life, their lives get affected as well. So for them to have that space that they can talk to and not feel that their job is going to be lost because they're having that conversation, that needs to be brought out more.
Okay. What about you, Officer Mosley? 15 seconds.
I'll say it starts at the top. It starts with the leadership. If you have the leaders that don't tolerate that nonsense, that's going to fix a lot of those problems. The problem is there are a lot of bad apples that continue to get protected. And as law enforcement officers, it's also our job to out those bad apples. If you have those bad apples, we need to put them on Front Street.
Very good. Now, gentlemen, can you make a one sentence closing remark?
For me, one thing I've said to my church recently is that we need to, as a church community, be mobilized. We've pretty much stood on the sidelines for years. Like with the story just escaped me now. The Good Samaritan, the priest and the Levite, they stood on the side. They passed by. They didn't get involved. The Good Samaritan got involved. He helped the man out. And I think as churches, as religious people, as communities of faith, we need to get stuck in. We need to get involved in these situations, mobilize our voices, mobilize our finances, our actions, our intelligence, our connections to help the community.
Thank you.
I would say if we look at Galatians 3:28, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, nor slave nor free, nor there male or female, for we all are in one in Christ Jesus. That being said, we're all in this together. And I know we've used that cliche throughout the COVID-19, but we're all in this together. As police officers, I have family, I have a wife, I have children. My mother is now in the nursing home with COVID-19. So I know what people are experiencing, and we all have to live together. So we have to learn how to get along better.
So Mosley?
I'll say unity. After 9/11, the several weeks after 9/11 was one of the best things that the country seen. And reason being is everyone was united. At that point in time, the majority of the country didn't see color. They just seen unity. What did you need? How can I help you? And we need to get back to that. We need to get back to the community where we help one another. We look at each other as that's my brother, that's my sister. And just, again, I can't say it enough. We just need to unite.
Thank you, gentlemen. This was very informative, very helpful. I'd like to close with saying these are difficult days, and the days ahead may yet be rough, but with God we can make it. Let's stand for right and truth. Black Lives Matter. Let no one put you down. Don't belittle yourself. Let no one cause you to hate. Keep the faith. I'd like to share just 3 Melbourne tips with you. 1, conquer your fears. Don't let them conquer you. 2, have a cause to which you are committed, that you'd rather die than give up. And finally, think before you speak. Listen twice as much as you speak. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a purpose. Over to Mr. Daly.
Boy, what a rich session we've had. Thank you, Dr. Melbourne, for leading us through a difficult, challenging conversation. But through the seasoned help of Officer Mosley, Pastor Murphy, and Reverend Lee, we were able to come away much richer because of the seasoned wisdom these men have shared with us this evening. So thank you, gentlemen, for what you've done to move us. I can see green shoots of hope, even during these challenging days, because of the seasoned, reflective wisdom we've heard from you today. So thank you so much. We also want to thank the audience who had joined us this evening. Without you, these virtual workshops would not have been worth it. And I hope you also will join me in thanking these gentlemen for sharing of their wisdom this evening. We want to tell you that if you have a friend who wasn't able to be on the call with us this evening, it was on Facebook Live, and it's on live stream that you can actually watch the rebroadcast of that. As Dr. Melbourne have said, these are challenging days, but one of the hallmarks of CEOS is its belief in prayer. And Tennyson said that most things have been wrought by prayer than we'll ever know of. So we ask you to continue to join us in prayerful conversation like this one to make our world and our spheres of influence much wider, much deeper, more transformative. Next week, we invite you to come back and join us again. Our starting time will be 5:24, and our topic next week will be mental health, America's two pandemics. Mental health, America's two pandemics. Do me a favor, put that on your calendar to join us and invite at least 2 people to be a part of this rich conversation. Till then, be safe, be well, and be hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Devon. I forgot to thank you for making this happen.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah, great. That was good.